I was delivering the forecast for a Category 4 hurricane when I found out my husband was sleeping with his secretary right there, live on channel 8, pointing at swirling red and yellow patterns, while my phone buzzed with photo evidence of Harold's betrayal. My voice never wavered as I informed Spokane that sunshine would return by the weekend. The studio lights burned against my skin while my marriage dissolved in my pocket, and that's your storm watch forecast back to you, Tom. The red light blinked off. I collapsed into my chair, knuckles white against the armrest. The photo. Harold and his barely legal secretary twisted in our Egyptian cotton sheets, seared into my retinas. The sheets I'd spent an absurd amount on during our anniversary trip. The ones he'd claimed were too expensive at the time. Olivia, you killed it today. My producer's voice crackled through my earpiece. The network loved how you handled that windspeed graphic. If only he knew how my insides were being shredded by my own personal disaster. Funny how you can smile through anything when you've spent 15 years reporting on other people's catastrophes. That night, rain pounded against my windshield as I drove home, not to the colonial we'd shared for 8 years, but to Margaret's guest bedroom where I'd been staying since filing for divorce. 3 weeks ago, the wipers pushed away the deluge in rhythmic swoops that matched my heartbeat. Betrayed, betrayed, betrayed. He didn't even have the decency to delete the home security app from my phone. I told Margaret over a tumbler of whiskey that smelled like my father's study. The amber liquid burned like the tears I refused to shed. Who screws someone on the bed they share with their wife and forgets about? The nanny cam in the corner, Margaret's ice cubes clinketed against glass men who think they're too smart to get caught. 15 years, I whispered, rolling the cold glass against my feverish forehead. 15 damn years. The divorce was finalized that Thursday. Harold got the house, I got freedom, and a settlement that would buy me silence about his indiscretions. Important for a man gunning for partner at his law firm. The pen felt impossibly heavy as I signed my married name for the last time. Miss Henderson. My lawyer said, congratulations on your new beginning. What a crock. My new beginning looked a lot like my old life falling apart in slow motion. The following Monday, I froze during the 7 o'clock broadcast, just completely seized up in front of 60. 0 viewers. The teleprompter rolled, but my mouth wouldn't form the words. All I could think about was Harold and that woman in our bed in our home while I warned strangers about incoming storm systems. Olivia. The anchor's voice sliced through my panic. I pushed through somehow, but the station manager was waiting. When I stepped off set, his cologne, sandalwood, and disappointment filled the narrow hallway. Take some time, he said, not unkindly. Get your head straight. Margaret found me crying in the parking lot, mascara rivers mapping new territories down my cheeks. Rain soaked through my blouse, plastering it against my skin. You need something, she said over coffee that tasted like liquid cardboard. Something that's just for you. That's how I ended up at the Spokane Community Choir 3 days later, clutching sheet music with trembling fingers. The room smelled of wood polish and hope, a scent I'd nearly forgotten. Sopranos to the left. The director called. I moved, automatically taking my place among women who smiled like they hadn't recently had their lives detonated. The piano struck its first chord, vibrating through the wooden floor and up into my bones, and then I heard her. An alto voice so rich and complex, it made my chest ache. I turned to locate its source and found myself staring into the most penetrating green eyes I'd ever seen. They belonged to a woman with fiery red hair and a slight smile that suggested she knew something about beautiful disasters. I missed my entrance, too captivated by this stranger whose voice seemed to speak directly to the broken places inside me. I didn't know them, that the hurricane I'd been tracking would be nothing compared to the storm this woman would bring into my life, or that the weather woman who predicted everyone else's future could never have foreseen her own. Her name was Isabel Russell, and she sang like someone who understood storms, not the meteorological kind I tracked for a living, but the human kind that leave you hollowed out and gasping for air. That's enough for tonight, everyone. The choir director announced, clapping his hands. Great first session. I fumbled with my sheet music, stealing glances at the redhead 3 rows over her hair caught, the fluorescent light turning it into living flame when she laughed at something. Her neighbor said the sound traveled across the room and settled somewhere beneath my ribs. First timer, I jumped. Nearly dropping my folder, Isabel stood beside me close enough that I caught her scent, something clean and wild like rain-washed pine. Is it that obvious? I tried to smile, but my face felt stiff, unpracticed, only to another first-timer. She extended her hand. Isabel. Russell, her palm was warm against mine, her grip firm. Something electric passed between us, or maybe that was just my imagination, desperate for connection after months of isolation. Olivia Henderson. I withdrew my hand, suddenly self-conscious. You have an incredible voice, says the woman whose soprano made me miss my entry. Her smile reached her eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that made my stomach flip. Some of us are grabbing coffee across the street. Would you like to join? 20 minutes later, I sat across from Isabel in a corner booth at Riverfront Rose. Steam rose from my latte, carrying the rich scent of espresso and vanilla. The other choir members had claimed a larger table nearby, but somehow Isabel and I had ended up alone, knees occasionally brushing under the small table. So you track hurricanes? I asked her, grateful to focus on something other than how her presence made my skin prickle with awareness. That sounds fascinating and terrifying, she added, running her finger around the rim of her mug. There's something humbling about standing before a force that could erase you without noticing. I know that feeling, I murmured without thinking. Her eyes found mine, searching. Divorce? The word hung between us. I nodded, surprised by my lack of hesitation. How did you know? The way you sing, she said, simply, like someone who's recently shed something heavy but isn't sure what to do with the newfound lightness. My laugh was sharp, unexpected, poetic, but I'm not feeling particularly light these days, no. I suppose not, not yet. She sipped her coffee, leaving a faint lip print on the white ceramic. My last relationship ended 2 years ago. It gets better, though. Some days you won't believe that what happened, I asked, then immediately backpedaled. Sorry. That's none of my business, she decided. Seattle offered better career opportunities than loving me. Did. Isabel's directness was refreshing. No euphemisms, no dancing around pronouns. She, the word, echoed in my mind, rearranging something I hadn't known needed rearranging. I'm sorry, I offered. Don't be, it led me here, didn't it, her? Gaze held mine for a beat too long. Outside rain began to fall, drumming against the windows in a soothing rhythm. The coffee shop grew more intimate as the world beyond darkened and blurred. Isabel leaned forward enough. About past storms tell me about these ones you predict. Do you get to name them? That's the National Hurricane Center, not local meteorologists like me. I explained, warming to the familiar topic, though I did track Hurricane Eliza from formation to landfall last year. Must be exciting. Her eyes sparkled. I chased them. The data we collect helps improve prediction models. You're a storm chaser. I couldn't hide my surprise or admiration. I prefer hurricane research scientist, but essentially yes, she laughed. I fly into them, measure them, try to understand what makes them tick. You fly into hurricanes. My voice rose. Voluntarily, says the woman who got divorced and immediately joined a choir full of strangers. We both laughed and something tight in my chest loosened. Slightly, the conversation flowed as easily as the rain down the windows. Minutes stretching into hours, we talked about weather patterns and favorite composers, childhood dreams, and adult disappointments. She listened like someone who genuinely wanted to hear my thoughts, not just waiting for her turn to speak. As the coffee shop began closing, Isabel walked me to my car. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and reflective under the street lights. We stood close, our breath clouding in the cool night air. I'm glad you joined choir, Olivia Henderson, she said softly. Before I could respond, she leaned forward and brushed her lips against my cheek. The contact was brief, electric, terrifying. Her lips were soft, warmer than the night air, and they lingered just long enough to make my heart stutter. See you next week, she whispered, then turned and walked to her own car, a practical blue Subaru that somehow suited her perfectly. I stood, frozen fingers pressed to my cheek where her lips had been, watching her taillights disappear into the night and wondering what kind of storm I had just invited into my life. The weather station hummed with its usual Monday morning chaos. I stood before the green screen, discussing a high-pressure system moving in from Canada, while my mind drifted to green eyes and red hair, and with that ridge building, we should see temperatures climbing into the mid-70s by Wednesday. I concluded, pointing to the animated graphics. Back to you, Steve. The red light blinked off. I exhaled, rolling my shoulders to release the tension that had built there overnight. 3 days since choir practice, 3 days since Isabel's lips had brushed my cheek, 3 days of analyzing that moment from every angle. Like a particularly complex weather pattern. You're back on your game, said Roger, our station manager, approvingly, as I passed his office. Whatever therapy you're doing, keep it up. If he only knew my therapy involved obsessing over a woman. I just met a woman who flew into hurricanes for a living, a woman whose casual touch had left me more disoriented than any storm system I'd ever tracked at my desk. I pulled up research on hurricane tracking aircraft, fascinated by what Isabella described. The images showed specialized planes pushing through massive walls of clouds, buffeted by winds that could tear houses from their foundations. What kind of person voluntarily flew into those conditions? The same kind who'd approach a clearly damaged divorce at choir practice. Apparently working hard or hardly working, Margaret appeared beside my desk, peering at my screen. Since when are you interested in hurricane hunters? Just expanding my professional knowledge. I lied, clicking away from a photo of researchers in flight suits. Right, she slid on to the edge of my desk. This wouldn't have anything to do with a certain redhead from choir, would it? The one you haven't shut up about all weekend? I felt heat rise to my face. I mentioned her once 15 times, but who's counting? Margaret grinned. She must have made quite an impression. Before I could formulate a suitably dismissive response, the receptionist appeared at my desk. Olivia, there's someone asking for you at the front. My heart did a ridiculous little leap. Did they give a name? Isabel Russell says she's a hurricane. Researcher Margaret's eyebrows shot toward her hairline as I stood smoothing my skirt with suddenly damp palms. Isabel stood in the reception area, a vision in dark jeans and a simple blue button-down that made her hair look even more vibrant. She held a paper bag that smelled tantalizingly of Thai food lunch delivery. She said by way of greeting, I was in the neighborhood for a meeting and thought you might be hungry. You thought, right? I was suddenly aware of my colleagues watching with undisguised interest. Want to eat outside? There's a courtyard. We settled on a bench beneath a maple tree, just starting to turn golden at the edges fallen. Spokane painted everything in rich amber tones, including Isabel's hair as the sunlight filtered through it. This is a surprise, I said, accepting the container of pad thai. She handed me a good one. I had a meeting with the university's atmospheric science department this morning. She twirled noodles around her fork. They're interested in collaborating on some predictive modeling work, so you'll be in Spokane more often. I tried to sound casual. That depends. Her eyes met mine. Is that something you'd like? The directness of her question stole my breath. Harold had never been direct. He had specialized in evasions and half-truths, a lifetime of lawyering that had eventually seeped into our marriage. Yes, I said simply. I think I would. Her smile was worth the moment of vulnerability. We ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the autumn breeze carrying the scent of her subtle perfume can. I ask you something, I finally ventured. Why me at choir? Isabel considered the question. There was something in your eyes, like you were weathering a storm. Nobody else could see that. Obvious, huh? To someone who studies storms, absolutely. She set down her fork. Want to walk? We strolled through the park, adjacent to the station. Fallen leaves crunching beneath our feet. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grass, and somewhere nearby a street musician played saxophone that drifted through the air like smoke. My divorce was finalized 3 weeks ago, I found myself saying after 15 years of marriage. What happened? Her question held no judgment, only gentle curiosity, the classic. Story caught him with his secretary in our bed. The words still tasted bitter on our anniversary sheets. Anniversary sheets, she raised an eyebrow. Egyptian cotton, 1,000 thread count. Ridiculously expensive, he complained about the cost the entire trip. I shook my head. Apparently, they were good enough for her, though. Isabel's hand found mine, her fingers warm and sure as they interlaced with my own. The gesture was so natural. I didn't think to pull away his loss. She said softly. Rain began to fall, light at first, then with increasing determination. We ducked under a park pavilion, watching sheets of water create a translucent curtain around us. The sudden downpour trapped us in our own private world. I should get back, I said reluctantly, watching raindrops race down Isabel's throat. Probably. She agreed, making no move to leave. Instead, she stepped closer, her eyes asking a question. I answered by closing the distance between us. Her lips were soft, tasting faintly of spice from the Thai food. The kiss was gentle at first, then deeper as her hands found my waist, pulling me against her, my fingers tangled in her hair. Its texture like silk against my skin, time suspended as the rain droomed against the pavilion roof, creating a rhythm that matched my racing heart. When we finally broke apart, I was breathless, dizzy with sensation. I've wanted to do that since choir practice, she whispered against my lips. For the first time in months, I felt something other than pain, something like possibility, something like hope. Olivia, we need to talk about this tropical depression forming off the coast. My producer's voice crackled through the headset as I prepared for the evening broadcast. It could develop into something significant by the weekend. I studied the satellite imagery, watching swirls of white and gray dance across the screen. Hurricane season was winding down, but Mother Nature didn't always follow the calendar. My phone buzzed with a text from Isabel, monitoring your tropical depression dinner. Tonight a smile crept across my face, warmth spreading through my chest. It had been 2 weeks since our kiss. In the rain, 2 weeks of stolen moments between her research and my broadcast schedule. 2 weeks of relearning what it felt like to be desired, to be seen. Olivia, are you listening? My producer sounded annoyed. Sorry. Yes, I'll emphasize the potential development in tonight's forecast. After the broadcast, I found myself studying my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back seemed different, somehow brighter eyes, a slight flush to her cheeks. I barely recognized myself. Hot date. Margaret appeared behind me, applying lipstick with practiced precision. Just dinner, I hedged with hurricane. Isabel, she bumped my shoulder playfully. Your glowing honey was. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. I hadn't intended to leap from marriage into whatever this was yet here. I stood checking my makeup before rushing to meet a woman who chased storms for a living. Isabel waited at an Italian bistro downtown, looking stunning in a simple black dress that highlighted the cream of her skin and the fire of her hair. When she saw me, her entire face lit up, the kind of genuine reaction that couldn't be faked. You look beautiful, she said, standing to greet me over wine and pasta. We talked about everything and nothing. Her research, my forecast, the choir performance coming up next month. Her foot occasionally brushed against mine under the table, sending sparks racing up my leg. I've been thinking, she said, twirling linguine around her fork. My grant includes funding for a local meteorologist to consult on our predictive modeling. Would you be interested working together? The prospect was both exciting and unnerving, strictly professional. She smirked, though. I can't promise. I won't stare at you during meetings. The waiter refilled our glasses as I considered her offer. I need to clear it with the station, but Olivia, the voice froze the blood in my veins. I turned slowly, already knowing who I'd see. Harold stood beside our table, his tailored suit and perfect hair as impeccable as ever. His eyes moved from me to Isabel, something calculating in his expression, I thought. That was you, he said, his tone artificially pleasant. How are you? Fine. I managed my napkin, twisted into a knot in my lap, you remember? I get the house key this weekend to collect the rest of my things, of course. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and who's your friend? I swallowed hard. Isabel. Russell, she's a hurricane research scientist at the university. Something shifted in Harold's expression as he extended his hand. Harold Cooper, Olivia's husband, ex-husband. I corrected sharply, right? His smile turned patronizing, still adjusting to the terminology. Isabel's gaze remained steady, unimpressed. Nice to meet you, Olivia speaks. Highly of your legal expertise, the subtle emphasis made me bite back a smile. Harold's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Well, I won't interrupt your dinner, Libby. Call me before you come by. I might have some papers for you to sign only after he walked away. Did I release the breath I'd been holding? My appetite had vanished, replaced by a nod of anxiety. Livy. Isabel raised an eyebrow. A name I've always hated. I admitted. Sorry about that. Don't apologize. Are you okay? I wasn't sure how to answer. Harold's appearance had shattered something fragile, the bubble of possibility Isabel and I had been building. I don't know what I'm doing. I confess, my voice barely above a whisper. With you, with any of this, is this rebound? Is this real? Am I just confused after 15 years with a man? Isabel reached across the table, her fingers cool against mine. Maybe it's all of those things. Maybe it doesn't need a label. Yet the next afternoon, my phone rang while I was preparing weather graphics. Harold's name flashed on the screen against my better judgment. I answered. We need to talk, he said without preamble, about your new friendship. My shoulders tensed. There's nothing to discuss, really, because the senior partners at my firm might disagree. They prefer their associates maintain a certain traditional image. Are you threatening me? Anger flared hot and bright. I'm reminding you that our settlement included mutual discretion. Your lifestyle choices could impact my career. My lifestyle choices are none of your business, I snapped. You gave up any say in my life when you slept with your secretary. The line went silent for a moment. Just think carefully about what you're doing, Libby. We both have reputations to protect. I hung up hands, shaking with rage and something close to fear, not for myself, but for the delicate new connection with Isabel. How quickly Harold had tried to poison it, to make me doubt myself that evening. Isabel found me sitting on a bench, overlooking the river, watching the currents sweep fallen leaves. Downstream, Margaret told me you left work early, she said, sitting beside me. Bad day, Harold called. He saw us at dinner and made implications. The words tasted sour. About me, about us, about what it might mean for his career if his ex-wife started dating a woman. Isabel was quiet for a long moment. And what did you tell him? I turned to face her, suddenly certain that it's none of his damn business. Her smile was slow and brilliant, like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. Without warning, she leaned forward and kissed me right there in public, her hands framing my face with exquisite tenderness. Good answer, she whispered against my lips. What about this one? Isabel asked, pointing to a craftsman-style house with a wraparound porch. It's closer to the station than your current apartment. We sat side by side on her couch, my laptop balanced between US as we scrolled through real estate listings. 3 months had passed since our first kiss in the rain. 3 months of discovering each other, of building something that felt increasingly solid despite its newness too. Big for just me, I said, clicking to the next property. Isabel's fingers brushed mine on the trackpad. Who said anything about just you? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implication. We hadn't discussed living together, hadn't even put official labels on whatever we were doing yet. Here, she was casually suggesting something that made my heart race. What exactly are you proposing, Dr. Russell? I kept my tone light, though. My pulse was anything but steady, nothing specific. She replied with a smile that suggested otherwise. Just pointing out that square footage shouldn't be your primary concern. Before I could respond, my phone rang, Margaret's name flashing on the screen. Hey, what's up? I answered. Turn on Channel 5 right now, she said without preamble. Harold's on the evening news. Isabel reached for the remote as I put the phone on speaker. Harold's face filled the screen, standing outside the courthouse in his best power suit as newly appointed head of the district attorney's special victims unit, he was saying, "I'm committed to protecting our community's most vulnerable citizens." When did this happen? I asked Margaret. Just announced today. She replied, "Apparently, your ex has political aspirations." I watched Harold shake hands with the current district attorney, his practiced smile not quite reaching his eyes, a detail probably imperceptible to anyone who hadn't spent 15 years cataloging. His expressions, "You okay?" Isabel asked after I hung up. "Fine," I said automatically, then reconsidered. "Actually, no. I'm furious he cheated on me, then lands a promotion that's all about protecting victims. The hypocrisy is staggering." Isabel took my hand. "Maybe this is a sign of what, that it's time for a fresh start somewhere new without constant reminders of your past." She had a point. Every corner of Spokane held memories of my life, with her old restaurants where we'd celebrated anniversaries, parks where we picnicked, the courthouse where I'd signed divorce papers with shaking hands. "You're right," I said finally. "Show me that listing in Pinehaven again." 2 weeks later, I stood in the empty living room of a charming 2-bedroom cottage in Pinehaven. A small town, 30 minutes outside Spokane. Sunlight streamed through bay windows, painting golden rectangles on the hardwood floors. "It's perfect." Isabel breathed beside me, and it was cozy without being cramped, modern, yet characterful, with a back deck overlooking woods that stretched to the horizon. Most importantly, it was mine, not Harold's, not ours. "Mine, I'll take it," I told the realtor, who beamed as she handed me the paperwork. Moving day arrived on a crisp October morning. Isabel showed up at dawn with coffee, donuts, and a rented moving truck. Margaret and 2 camera operators from the station came to help turning what could have been a lonely transition into something that felt like celebration. "Where does this box go?" Isabel asked, hefting a carton labeled "Winter Clothes Master Bedroom Closet." I directed, trying not to think about how domestic this felt, how right by evening only the 2 of us remained. We sat on the back deck with takeout pizza and beer, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The woods behind the house rustled with evening activity. Birds settling, small creatures scurrying through underbrush. "Thank you," I said softly, "for everything today." Isabel smiled, her profile gilded by the fading light. "What are girlfriends for the term sent?" A pleasant shock through me. We hadn't been using labels yet. The word felt natural coming from her lips. "Is that what we are?" I asked, heart fluttering. "Girlfriends?" She turned to face me fully. "What would you call this?" I considered the question. "Something I never expected, something that scares me sometimes, how much I want it." Isabel set down her beer bottle and moved closer until our thighs touched on the wooden bench. "Fear isn't always bad. It means you're taking risks." Living her kiss tasted of beer and promise. I tangled my fingers in her hair, drawing her closer as evening deepened around us. We might have stayed like that for hours, if not for the sound of a throat clearing nearby. We broke apart to find an older couple standing at the edge of my property line, wearing identical expressions of polite discomfort. "Sorry to interrupt," the woman said. "We're your neighbors. The Millers just wanted to welcome you to Pinehaven." "Olivia Henderson." I managed my face. "Burning nice to meet you. We brought a housewarming gift." Mrs. Miller held out a tin of what appeared to be homemade cookies and a bit of neighborly advice. I accepted the tin with murmured thanks, noting the exchange of glances between husband and wife. "Pinehaven is a special community," M.R. Miller said carefully. "We have traditions, monthly gatherings that might seem unusual to newcomers." "Frank means the full moon meetings." Mrs. Miller clarified. "Nothing to worry about, just town history. But you might notice folks gathering in the woods behind your property. Best not to mention it to outsiders." They departed with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, leaving Isabel and me exchanging bewildered looks. "Did that strike you as odd?" I asked. "Extremely." Isabel peered into the darkening woods. "What kind of town has secret full moon gatherings?" "The kind I apparently just moved to." I laughed, but uneasiness crept along my spine like a cold finger, as if sensing my discomfort. Isabel wrapped her arms around me from behind, her warmth solid and reassuring. Against my back, whatever weird cult you've accidentally joined. She whispered in my ear, at least you've got a hurricane chaser for backup. I leaned into her embrace, watching as the first stars appeared above the mysterious woods of Pinehaven. 3 weeks into life in Pinehaven, I woke at midnight to the sound of singing, not the cheerful kind from our community choir, but something ancient and wordless that seemed to rise from the earth itself. I slipped from bed, careful not to wake Isabel, who had stayed over after we'd shared a bottle of wine and fallen asleep watching old movies. The full moon hung low and heavy in the sky, bathing my backyard in silvery light that transformed the familiar landscape into something otherworldly. At the edge of the woods, flashlight beams danced between trees. Like fireflies wrapping myself in a robe, I stepped onto the back deck. The October air bit at my exposed skin, but curiosity pulled me forward. The voices grew clearer, at least a dozen people chanting in harmony, their words unintelligible, but the rhythm unmistakable, like a heartbeat, like a storm. What are you doing? I nearly jumped out of my skin. Isabel stood in the doorway, her hair tousled from sleep eyes, sharp with concern. Listen, I whispered, pointing toward the woods. The Millers weren't kidding about full moon gatherings. She joined me at the railing, her shoulder warm against mine, as we watched the distant lights weave among the trees. Should we investigate? She asked, a spark of adventure lighting her eyes. The meteorologist in me, the woman who had built a career on explaining natural phenomena, who believed in barometric pressure rather than superstition, said no. But another part of me, the part that had been reawakened by Isabel's kisses, was already reaching for shoes. We followed the tree line, staying in shadow. The singing grew louder, punctuated by what sounded like drums through a clearing. We spotted them, nearly 20 people arranged in a circle. Around a small fire, I recognized the Millers, the barista from the local coffee shop, and my mail carrier. What are they doing? Isabel whispered before I could respond. A twig snapped beneath my foot. The singing stopped abruptly. A dozen flashlights swung in our direction. Who's there? Called Mr. Miller's voice. It's just me. I stepped forward, heart pounding. Olivia, your new neighbor. An uncomfortable silence followed, broken finally by Mrs. Miller's strained laugh. Well, this is embarrassing, she said, approaching us. We don't usually have an audience. Sorry to intrude, I said. We heard singing and got curious. The gathered townspeople exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Since you're here, Mr. Miller finally said, you might as well join us. That's how Isabel and I found ourselves seated on log benches, watching as the residents of Pinehaven resumed their strange ceremony. They sang to the moon, and the trees poured libations onto the earth and spoke of weather patterns with the reverence others reserve for scripture. We've been doing this since Pinehaven was founded, Mrs. Miller explained afterward as the gathering dispersed. The town sits in a unique microclimate. Our ancestors believe these ceremonies helped balance the weather. Balance the weather. Isabel's scientific curiosity was piqued. Pinehaven has never experienced extreme weather events, Mr. Miller said proudly. No tornadoes, no devastating floods, no life-threatening blizzards, not in 200 years. Isabel and I exchanged skeptical glances. That's statistically improbable, she said, yet true. Mrs. Miller insisted, check the historical records if you don't believe us. The next morning, we did exactly that. Isabel used her university credentials to access meteorological archives while I searched through Pinehaven's local history at the town library. This is bizarre, Isabel said, spreading printouts across my kitchen table. They're right. The worst storms consistently dissolve or change course before hitting Pinehaven. It defies normal weather patterns. And look at this, I added, showing her a town charter. Dating back to 1823, the founder was apparently a meteorologist of sorts. There are detailed instructions for the monthly ceremonies, all tied to atmospheric conditions. We spent days combing through data, finding increasingly compelling evidence that Pinehaven existed in some kind of meteorological bubble. It was fascinating from a scientific perspective, even if the explanation singing to trees under the full moon seemed absurd. We need to document this. Isabel declared, her researcher's mind already cataloging approaches. If there's really a microclimate effect, it could have implications for climate adaptation strategies. One evening, as autumn deepened toward winter, we sat before the fireplace, with tea and notebooks, developing research protocols to measure Pinehaven's unusual weather patterns. Outside rain tapped against the windows in a gentle rhythm that made the cottage feel even cozier. What if it's real? I amused, watching fire light play across Isabel's face. What if these people have somehow figured out how to influence local weather? That would change everything we know about atmospheric science, she said, eyes shining with the possibility. The power chose that moment to fail, plunging us into darkness, broken only by firelight. I fumbled for candles as Isabel stoked the flames higher. Perfect timing, she laughed, helping me arrange. Candles on the coffee table. Universe wants us to appreciate the mysteries of nature in the flickering golden light. She looked ethereal, her red hair gleaming copper, her skin luminous. Something shifted between us in that moment, something deeper than physical attraction or intellectual connection. I'm falling in love with you, I said, the words spilling out before I could consider their weight. I wasn't looking for this, wasn't expecting it, but here we are. Isabel sat down, her notebook moving closer until our knees touched. Her hands found mine warm and steady. I've been falling since that first day in choir, she admitted, her voice soft, waiting for you to be ready to hear it. Her kiss tasted of tea and certainty, deepening as the wind outside intensified. We moved from sofa to bedroom in a tangle of half-removed clothing and breathless laughter, discovering each other by candlelight as the storm raged beyond the walls. Hours later, lying in the peaceful aftermath with Isabel's head on my chest, I watched shadows dance across the ceiling and realized I'd never felt more at home in this strange town and this new life in my own skin. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning as I was preparing for my early broadcast. Miss Henderson, we've been impressed by your work at Channel 8 Spokane. Our network is expanding its weather team, and we'd like to discuss a potential position with you. The role would be based at our headquarters in Atlanta. I read it 3 times, my coffee growing cold beside my keyboard. Atlanta, national exposure, the career leap I dreamed about for years before. The divorce before Pinehaven, before Isabel. My stomach twisted at the thought of leaving her, of putting 0 miles between us, just as we'd found our rhythm together. But wasn't this exactly what I'd worked toward my entire career? I closed the email without responding. I needed time to think at the station. Margaret noticed my distraction, immediately. Spill it, she demanded during a commercial break. You've been staring at the same weather map for 10 minutes. When I told her about the offer, her eyes widened. Atlanta, that's big league, Olivia. She squeezed my arm. But what about Hurricane Girl? I don't know, I admitted. We haven't discussed long distance. We've barely defined what we are. Well, define it before you decide, she advised. Don't make the same mistake I did, choosing career over love. You can have both that evening, Isabel and I continued our investigation of Pinehaven's weather anomaly. We'd set up monitoring equipment in my backyard and started interviewing longtime residents about the town's history. Mrs. Jenkins swears her great-grandfather could predict rainfall to the minute, Isabel said, reviewing her notes, and apparently the town's founder believed the local geology created some kind of natural atmospheric stabilizer. I nodded, only half listening, as I struggled with how to bring up the job offer. You're somewhere else tonight, Isabel observed, setting down her notebook. Everything okay? I got a job offer, I blurted. Out from the Weather Channel in Atlanta, the words hung between us like storm clouds. Isabel's expression shifted through surprised pride, and finally something more complicated. That's incredible, she said finally, her voice carefully neutral. When would you start? I haven't responded yet. I wanted to talk to you first, She reached for my hand across the table. This is your dream, isn't it? National coverage, bigger audience. It was, I admitted. Before everything changed before you. I didn't say before us. Don't do that. Isabel shook her head. Don't use me as an excuse to turn down an opportunity you've worked for your entire career. It's not an excuse if it's true. I counted my priorities. Have shifted. She stood up, abruptly pacing my small kitchen. We've been together, 4 months? That's not long enough to make life-altering decisions. Her words stung, so what we have isn't serious enough to factor into my decisions. That's not what I meant. She ran a hand through her hair in frustration. I just don't want to be the reason you give up something important. What about your research here? I asked the Pinehaven anomaly. My grant is portable. I can study weather patterns anywhere, including Atlanta. The question escaped before I could stop it. Isabel paused her, pacing her eyes. Meeting mine, are you asking me to move across the country with you? The midnight moon gathering saved me from having to answer through the kitchen window. We spotted flashlights moving into the woods behind my house earlier than usual for the monthly ceremony. Something's different. Isabel noted her scientific curiosity, temporarily overriding our tense conversation. Let's check it out. The Pinehaven residents had gathered in their usual clearing, but tonight there was urgency in their movements. Mrs. Miller spotted us approaching and waved us over. You're just in time. She said, her face grave. We've detected a disturbance. What kind of disturbance? Isabel asked. Mr. Miller pointed to homemade instruments arranged around the clearing, barometers, windsocks, and devices. I didn't recognize the protective barrier as weakening. He explained we need to strengthen it before the next major system hits. Isabel and I exchanged skeptical glances. Protective barrier. It sounded like something from a fantasy novel, not meteorological science. Yet, as the ceremony progressed, something undeniable happened. The wind, which had been gusting strongly, gradually calmed the clouds overhead, which had been racing across the moon, slowed and thinned. The very air seemed to change texture, becoming somehow more stable. I can't explain this, Isabel whispered, her scientific mind visibly struggling with what we were witnessing. By the time we returned to my cottage, our earlier argument seemed distant and unimportant in the face of what we'd seen. We stayed up until dawn reviewing our monitoring equipment data, which showed inexplicable atmospheric stabilization coinciding exactly with the ceremony. It defies everything I know about weather systems, Isabel said, staring at the readings, but the data doesn't lie. Maybe there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, I quoted with a small smile. She laughed, the tension between us finally breaking Shakespeare's side. This could revolutionize our understanding of localized weather manipulation if we can prove it's real, I added. If she agreed, squeezing my hand, which we won't do if you're in Atlanta and I'm here and there. It was the dilemma laid bare again: career advancement or groundbreaking research, national recognition or this unexpected partnership that had revitalized my life. I don't have to decide today, I said finally, and whenever I decide, I want it to be our decision, not just mine. Isabel's smile was worth every potential sacrifice. Our decision. She repeated the words, a promise. I liked the sound of that. Olivia Henderson Harold's voice on the other end of the line made my stomach clench. I hadn't spoken to him since our uncomfortable restaurant encounter months ago. What do you want, Harold? I balanced my phone between shoulder and ear as I continued packing overnight supplies. A massive storm system was approaching the Pacific Northwest, and Isabel and I planned to document its effects on Pinehaven's supposed weather barrier. I saw your little friend on the university website, he said without preamble. Interesting research she's conducting. Weather manipulation through geological anomalies. Sounds like career suicide. I froze. How do you know about her research? I make it my business to know things, Libby, always have. His voice carried that smooth arrogance I once mistook for confidence. The scientific community will crucify her for pursuing pseudoscience. Unless she has irrefutable evidence. The threat was thinly veiled. Harold had connections throughout Spokane's professional circles, including at the university where Isabel's funding originated. This isn't your concern. I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It is when my ex-wife is publicly associating with someone pushing fringe theories, reflects poorly on me by association. We've been divorced for months. My associations reflect nothing on you. Tell that to the partners considering me for the managing director position. He countered a position that comes with considerable scrutiny of one's personal connections. My blood boiled. Are you actually threatening Isabel's career to protect your own image? Simply expressing concern for both your reputations, his tone was maddeningly reasonable. Perhaps reconsider your involvement before things go too far. I hung up without saying goodbye, hands shaking with fury of the storm. Outside mirrored my internal. State dark clouds, gathering pressure building. I called Isabel immediately. Harold knows about our research. He's making threats. What kind of threats? Her voice was calm, studying. Implied ones about damaging your academic reputation. He's up for some big promotion and apparently thinks being connected to pseudoscience through me will hurt his chances. Let him try. Isabel said with surprising steel in her voice, I have data preliminary, yes, but compelling the university knows the direction of my research. He has influence. I warned. So do I. She paused. Meet me at the coffee shop. We need to talk strategy. 20 minutes later, we hunched over laptops at Riverfront Rose, reviewing our findings from the past 2 months. Outside, the wind had picked up considerably, bending trees and sending debris skittering down the street. If the storm behaves like the others, Isabel explained, it should weaken significantly as it approaches Pinehaven's borders. We'll have empirical evidence of the anomaly, and if Harold tries to discredit you, science is about following evidence, even when it leads to unconventional conclusions. She reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. I faced skepticism my entire career. I won't let your ex-husband intimidate me. Her confidence was infectious. By the time we returned to Pinehaven that evening, I felt ready to face whatever Harold might throw our way. What I wasn't prepared for was finding him standing on my front porch. What are you doing here? I demanded, stepping protectively in front of Isabel. Harold smiled thinly. Community outreach as a representative of the district attorney's office. I'm checking on residents in areas that might be affected by tonight's storm. Cut the crap, Isabel said, surprising both of us. You're here to intimidate us. His smile vanished. Dr. Russell, I presume your research methods have raised concerns among several university board members. Might be worth reconsidering your approach before next quarter's funding reviews. Isabel stepped forward, unflinching. Are you threatening to interfere with my grant funding? Simply sharing collegial advice. He glanced at the darkening sky. Storms can be destructive. Best to seek proper shelter rather than chasing fantasies. Leave, I said, my voice low and dangerous now. After he drove away, Isabel and I quickly set up our final monitoring equipment. The coming storm would be the perfect test case for Pinehaven's weather anomaly if we could document it properly. Word of Harold's visit spread quickly through the small town as evening fell and the wind intensified. Neighbors began appearing at my door. Heard you had trouble, Mrs. Miller said, carrying a thermos of coffee. The community protects its own. Behind her stood Mr. Miller and at least a dozen other Pinehaven residents, all carrying weather monitoring instruments or storm supplies. We've been documenting the barrier for generations, explained the town librarian, showing us leather-bound journals dating back decades. Your research isn't pseudoscience, it's confirmation of what we've always known. As the storm front approached, the entire town gathered at the edge of the woods behind my house, not in secret this time, but openly, proudly demonstrating their tradition. Isabel and I moved among them with scientific instruments, measuring barometric pressure, wind speed, and a dozen other variables. The data was undeniable. As the storm reached Pinehaven's boundaries, it weakened dramatically, wind speeds dropping by nearly 40%, pressure stabilizing, precipitation decreasing from torrential to torrentially steady. This is incredible, Isabel breathed, watching her monitors. The effect is Strongest when the community participates in the ritual, not ritual. Corrected Mrs. Miller gently. Synchronized atmospheric engagement. Your instruments prove what works. We just found it through different methods. By midnight, while surrounding, communities faced power outages and flooding. Pinehaven experienced nothing worse than a moderately gusty rainstorm. Our equipment recorded every detail of this. Meteorological impossibility. Harold can't dispute this evidence. Isabel said as we downloaded the final data, this will revolutionize localized weather management research. The next morning, our triumph was shared by the entire town. People stopped by with food grateful for our scientific validation of their generation's old practice. Even the local newspaper ran a front-page story. Researchers confirmed Pinehaven's weather phenomenon. The story spread beyond our small town, picked up by regional outlets, and eventually by meteorological blogs. Harold's attempts to discredit Isabel's research withered in the face of empirical evidence and public fascination. We did it, I told Isabel as we watched coverage on my living room TV. We protected Pinehaven's secret by bringing it into the light. She smiled, wrapping her arms around me, and we protected each other. 6 months after our showdown with Harold and the storm, I stood in front of the green screen at Channel 8 delivering my final forecast for Spokane, and with that high pressure system moving in, we're looking at clear skies through the weekend. I concluded with a smile that felt entirely genuine. This is Olivia. Henderson signing off the red light, blinked off a chapter of my life, ending not with regret, but with anticipation. You killed it, Margaret said, hugging me tight as I stepped away from the set. Atlanta doesn't deserve you, but they're lucky to get you. I'd accepted the Weather Channel position, but with modifications, I would split my time between Atlanta and Spokane, creating special segments on microclimates and community-based weather management inspired by Pinehaven's remarkable system. The decision hadn't been easy, but Isabel made it possible. We can have both, she'd said, echoing Margaret's earlier wisdom. Your career advancement and our research, my university work and our relationship, she'd secured a research partnership with both the Weather Channel and her university, establishing Pinehaven as a long-term study site for atmospheric anomalies. We would travel together when possible and maintain our home in Pinehaven. The rest of the time, our home, the word, still sent thrills through me. The station threw me a farewell party. That evening, colleagues from every department showed up along with friends I'd made throughout my 15 years in Spokane, even some Pinehaven residents drove in for the celebration, including the Millers who brought their famous weather-predicting cookies. Isabel arrived last, stunning in a green dress that made her red hair seem even more vibrant. She carried a small wrapped package, which she presented with uncharacteristic shyness. Open it now, she urged. Inside was a compact brass barometer, antique and beautiful, with our initials engraved on the back alongside the coordinates of Pinehaven, so you'll always know which way the wind blows, she said softly. 2 weeks later, we launched WeatherWise, an app that combined traditional meteorological data with community-sourced observations inspired by Pinehaven's system. Allowed local knowledge to enhance scientific predictions, creating more accurate forecasts for small communities often overlooked by major weather services. The app's development team worked out of a renovated barn at the edge of my property, transformed into a modern office space while maintaining its rustic charm. Isabel and I oversaw the project between our other commitments, watching it grow from concept to reality with astonishing speed. Never thought I'd become a tech entrepreneur, I told Isabel as we reviewed user statistics one evening, especially not at 4035. She corrected with a grin, and why not? You were ready for something new. She was right. The woman who'd stood frozen on the weather set a year ago, devastated by divorce and uncertain of her future, had been replaced by someone I barely recognized, but thoroughly enjoyed being. Someone who took risks, someone who followed evidence rather than expectations. 1 year to the day after our first choir practice, Isabel and I returned to the Spokane community choir as guest performers. We'd maintained our membership despite busy schedules, finding the weekly practice a grounding ritual amid constant travel and work demands next. Up we have a special duet. The director announced Olivia Henderson and Isabel Russell performing. After the storm, we took our places side by side. The piano introduction began, and Isabel's rich alto filled the room, first followed by my soprano. Our voices twined together, telling a story of weathering tempests and finding clarity in their wake. The applause afterward was heartwarming, but nothing compared to the private moment. We shared backstage, her lips against mine, whispering, "We make beautiful music together." The next evening, I prepared for a special sunset forecast, a feature the Weather Channel had approved for my segment on unique microclimates. We would broadcast live from Pinehaven, explaining its remarkable weather stability while showcasing our app's community integration. The camera crews set up on a hilltop overlooking the town, catching golden hour light that made everything glow. Isabel watched from behind the cameras, professional yet supportive. "We're living 3-2-1. The director pointed at me. "Good evening from Pinehaven, Washington." I began gesturing to the picturesque town below. "I'm Olivia Henderson, with a special report on how this community has developed unique methods of weather resilience." The segment progressed smoothly as I explained Pinehaven's extraordinary meteorological history and demonstrated our new app's capabilities. As I moved toward my conclusion, my heart began racing with anticipation for what would come next. Weather prediction is ultimately about understanding patterns, I said, moving slightly off script in storms and life. Recognizing patterns helps us navigate uncertainty. I glanced toward Isabel, who looked confused by my deviation. "Some patterns are worth breaking," I continued, "like believing happiness follows a predetermined path, and some are worth embracing fully when you recognize them." I motioned for Isabel to join me on camera, not part of our planned segment, like the pattern I recognized with this remarkable woman, I said as she hesitantly stepped into frame, "who taught me that after every storm comes clarity." I reached into my pocket, withdrew a small box, and dropped to one knee. "Isabel Russell, will you marry me?" Her green eyes widened, lips parting in surprise before breaking into the smile that had become my favorite weather pattern. "Yes," she laughed, pulling me to my feet 1,000 times. Yes, our kiss broadcast live to weather enthusiasts nationwide might have been unprofessional, but as the sun set over Pinehaven, painting us in golden light, I couldn't imagine a more perfect forecast for our future.